Tonight, our guest on the podcast is one of the most legendary figures from the early days of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in the United States and its unveiling to the rest of the world. This gentleman was there as a witness, a student, a soldier to the Gracie family when necessary, and in his own words, Rorion Gracie's official shit starter. Please welcome to the podcast Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Black Belt, Professor Richard Bresler. Professor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to get started with some questions that may kind of jump all over the place, but you'll have to forgive us that we probably came up with, so many questions that the podcast would never end if we didn't start somewhere. So if we can start with when you and Rorion became roommates. You say in your book, Worth Defending, How Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Saved My Life, that some of your first house guests there were Carlos Gracie Jr., Rickson, Elio himself. What was your first impression of each of them, considering that you didn't know at the time exactly who those guys were?
Well, you have to remember back when Rorion and I moved in together, which was October of '80, I'd already been a student for a year. So I had heard plenty of stories about Rickson and his father. Not so much Carlos Gracie Jr., other than that he was a cousin. But, to finally meet them, it was kind of surreal. Here I get to, share the house that I'm living in. I mean, basically, the week that we moved in, they visited the first week. So it was kind of like the way to christen the house, to have, Rickson and Grandmaster Elio, which back then, I don't know if they even called him Grandmaster. I don't even know what color. I think he wore a black belt. Right. I don't know when he put the even a coral belt or a red belt on. But it was. I mean, I was in awe.
Now, did at that time? Well, let me back up just a little bit. When in your book, shortly after you hit on this, you talk about that you got the chance to take private classes with all three?
Yes.
So once you were able to take classes with each of them, how did their technique and teaching methodology, how did it differ, if at all, and what were their similarities?
Well, from Elio's side of the family, which is Rorion and Rickson. I mean, Rorion was a polished teacher by the time I had met him. I mean, he'd probably been teaching classes at that point for at least 10 years, where Rickson was 18 years old, may have started teaching, on and off, a few people. I'm not sure exactly what age he started to teach, but Rorion was very polished, and Elio was very similar to Rorion. The difference was that Elio never learned English. When Rorion said, like, you're going to have a class with my dad today, I said, like, how are we going to communicate? He says, you don't have to talk. He said, you speak the same language, jiu-jitsu. And, he would just signal me to where to put my hand, where to do this. I mean, so it was, but Rorion was still there watching the class and, giving me a little bit of, like, my father said this, or do it like that, or whatever.
Right.
And, and Carlos was just a lesser technical. I was just talking about this to one of my students, I think yesterday, is that one of the things that I was taught to do as being a teacher was to make the technique easier. Sorry, just getting over a cold. To make the technique easier, to put your body in a certain position that makes the technique easier for the student to do. And that's one of the things that I was so used to Rorion. So if this is basically your only instruction, this is what you think everybody does. It's jiu-jitsu. They teach jiu-jitsu, and this is the way it is. So when I got on the mat with Carlos Gracie Jr., who's probably maybe a little taller than Rorion, and he weighs, maybe, I don't know, 10 or 20 pounds more than Rorion. I noticed his weight, he felt so much heavier. And Rorion always made himself feel lighter, especially when you're learning a technique. And so those are the little things that I noticed that most people wouldn't notice because they haven't experienced it. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. So if this is your experience, this is the way you think everybody is doing it. I mean, it was when years later, after leaving the academy and looking at other people teach jiu-jitsu, I realized how much different everybody teaches. Because, most people, when they teach a class, I ask the questions, I go, who taught you to teach? Well, my teacher. Well, who taught him to teach? Well, the guy before him. In other words, so where did you learn to teach? And the problem is, no one really taught them how to teach. They just basically showed moves from the guy that taught them, and then they handed it down. So there was no systematic way of how to teach jiu-jitsu. So because that's what I got, and I thought everybody was getting it, and it was an awakening, because there's a lot of good, guys that show moves, but there's, Rorion told me a long time ago, he said, if you want to make sure the student learns nothing, show them everything. If you show a lot of moves in a class, it's going to be really cool, and they're going to go, oh, wow, man, that was so cool, this and that. But you can only absorb a certain amount. So, he held back. So, to teach X amount of classes in a move, that's why, I'm even though I've been asked to do seminars, I don't show a lot of moves in seminars, just because I want the person to be able to retain something that I'm showing. I don't want to just go like, oh man, that was so cool. So it was the teaching.
Sorry to cut you off there, Professor. What you're talking about here, this is part of the methodology Elio Gracie taught as far as shading. Is that correct?
I don't know the term shading.
So small amounts, similar to painting the wall, that you just need to paint small amounts. And if you throw just a ton of paint on the wall, it's all just going to fall to the bottom. But if small amounts at a time, you can retain that information. And that's the way that I'm understanding what you're saying, that in the format of a seminar, you really don't have the capability to teach the way that you were taught, because of that exact thing, that you want to stick on small elements of the technique and really dig deep rather than dig long.
Yeah, very similar to that.
Yes. So as far as Elio, were you able to feel or recognize more depth or efficiency from him, even though the other guys were and are masters of the technique? Was there a clear distinction?
I was way too young in the path to really notice any kind of a difference, other than what I told you about Carlos. You know, I mean, I couldn't really appreciate the differences back then because I was still way too new to jiu-jitsu.
So at this time, you were a blue belt?
Yeah, I was a blue belt.
So your progression through the system was super carefully crafted by Rorion. After you started feeling comfortable with those fundamental 40 lessons, did Rorion have you to continue to cycle those lessons, or did he introduce you to something akin to what would be the master cycle today?
No, the master cycle was a kind of a brainchild of Hanner. It's just they had like the first 36 classes or 40 classes were basically there to just give you a kind of an overview of what jiu-jitsu is. I mean, that's basically all you're doing, is you're just learning the 36 classes that are there for for like the self-defense course. I mean, here I am, like 36, 40 classes, and all of a sudden I get a blue belt. I mean, 40 classes, and these were half-hour classes, so we're talking about 20 hours, and then I became a blue belt. And then I stayed a blue belt for about 6 years. So, and all that was back then was I was no longer a beginner. And this is where the path started.
Would you say at that time that you were, once you got your blue belt, that although it was, short, like you said, short time, you were capable at that time of defending yourself against a bigger, stronger, more athletic opponent?
Well, that was the theory. I mean, I never went out and tested it, but Rorion said the thing that he used back then for marketing was, you're 3 times more effective after 20 classes than you were when you first came in. And I thought about it. I went, wow, 3 times more effective. And I says, yeah, I could see how I could be 3 times more effective. I mean, I didn't know anything when I first started, and then I had certain, I had enough, so I was 3 times more effective, whatever that means. And then the path begun. I could be a blue belt for 6 years. I mean, I thought I'd always be a blue belt after that.
Just as a side note, I believe that I was a blue belt for something like 11 years as well. So although it was much later, I definitely know the feeling of believing that you're going to be a blue belt forever. So you clicked at the time with Rorion. Did you feel that you had clicked also with Rickson, although he was younger, like you said? Did you feel the same kind of spirit from Rickson?
Well, I didn't really get to know Rickson until later. I mean, when I went to Brazil in '81, after hearing so much about the family, I wanted to kind of see where it was coming from. I had loaned Rorion a few $1,000s at the time, and he was going back and forth to Brazil, and I kind of wanted to see what was going on. In other words, I wanted to see. I heard so many things about jiu-jitsu in Brazil I wanted to see. So when I went back to Brazil, I had met Rickson's wife at the time, Kim,
Mm-hmm.
and she was pregnant with Rickson. And she spoke English, so I happened to go over to their house and spent a little time with her at her house with Rickson. So, I mean, I got a chance to, and him and I went to, she sent us to the store to get some food for dinner. I don't even remember. This was so long ago. But he didn't speak English. So him and I are walking down the streets of Brazil, and I'm feeling like here in the evening, I mean, Brazil was not really a tame place, but I really felt like I had a bodyguard with me. I said to myself, no one's going to bother me. I'm with freaking Rickson Gracie.
Right.
And so and Rickson and I mean, remember, you're walking down the street together. You don't speak each other's language, and you just look at each other and you put your thumbs up like, yeah, like you're cool. So he knew that I was his brother's roommate and I was helping his brother. So, and so we developed a fondness. I mean, I really liked his energy. He was very cool to hang with. And so, I started to, get to know him. And, but I was only there for a short time and then came back. And when he came over, because he had come a little bit later, first it was Hoist that came over, and then Rickson came over, a few years later. And then when Rickson came over after the academy started, or even before the academy started, when he was teaching out of his garage, I would go over and I would take privates with Rickson. I really liked the way that he taught. I realized that my jiu-jitsu would be better from Rickson because he was such a warrior, and so, it's, I just enjoyed getting classes from Rickson. His jiu-jitsu, it was a little different than everyone else. Rorion was more technical. Rickson was kind of more of a warrior kind of an attitude. I think if I would have trained a lot more with Rickson, I would have become much tougher if my body could have held out. And that's one of the biggest things is, your body being able to deal with that kind of wear and tear.
Was it that he put more, pressure, but not just pressure, heavy pressure, but attack pressure?
Well, what he did, Rickson taught a different class than I ever took. Rickson had, like, his classes where before I would take a half-hour class, I would go over to Rickson's place, and he would teach me a 45-minute class. And a half an hour of technique, and then basically 15 minutes of nonstop rolling. And, I'd start to get tired, and I'd say, I need to take a rest. He goes, no, this is where the jiu-jitsu kicks in. Don't stop. So it kind of like, wow. So it was teaching me a lot about the jiu-jitsu. I mean, because when you're tired, like when you're just rolling, you have a chance to slow down. You kind of feel where it's going. But when you really start to get exhausted, then it's pure instinct. It's pure what you've learned. And that's what he would do. He would want to get me, to that point of, here you go. You got to go now. And which was a lot different than what I was learning from anyone else.
Was this in Brazil where you were able to train the most? This was in America.
No. Yeah, this was when Rickson came over to the U.S.
Okay, so when you were in Brazil, if I can roll it back just a bit here, when you were there, you had the chance to meet Holes. Was he interacting with you in English?
We had such a limited interaction, and he really didn't speak that good of English. I was staying with a guy by the name of Jacare Romero Cavalcante.
Right.
And Jacare was really good friends with Halls. So, Halls would come over and he met the academy. So it was very, very limited. I mean, him and I can't say we really connected. Just meeting a little bit, sharing a little bit of the mat, me getting to watch him, play with other, like a guy that came in, a judo champion. So it was really interesting to see him interact and really use the jiu-jitsu that I was learning.
So,
but we weren't really, I mean, you can't really connect with everybody. I connected with Rickson.
Just as a side note here, I've had the chance to train a little bit with a Jacare. He's the promoting instructor of a friend of ours, a recently deceased instructor, Octavio Couto. Are you familiar with Octavio?
No.
So yeah, he recently passed away, but Jacare was his professor, great guy, and that must have been awesome as well. But what were your first impressions of Holes?
Just that I'd heard so much about him, and how he was kind of taking things to a new level in his technique. I mean, he wasn't complacent. He was always looking at other types, like wrestling and whatnot, to improve, and he was the guy was a beast on the mat. I mean, he really he was just he was inventive, and his life was cut short, and I really think he would have shown the world a lot of other things. I mean, I think there would have been a lot of focus on him.
Professor, there's a big debate in the jiu-jitsu world about who was better, Rickson or Holes. Do you have an opinion from your experience on that?
No. I think at one time that Hall's was better, but Hall's was basically, I think one of the reasons why Hickson is so good is because of Hall's.
Absolutely. So just to wrap up the trip to Brazil situation, which is a fascinating part of your book, where you go into detail about witnessing Hall's in action and getting the opportunity to roll around with a little kid there who gave you some trouble on the mat. And that little kid was none other than Rorion Gracie. And the folks that are listening, they'll have to pick up your book to find out exactly what happened there. But suffice it to say, it was amazing for you. Now, your book is worth defending. How Gracie Jiu-Jitsu saved my life. And we're so honored to be speaking with you. You're the author, Jiu-Jitsu black belt. But my question, Professor, is if you could tell us about meeting our other Grandmaster, Carlos Gracie Sr., and what you can tell us about, your short, limited interaction with the Grandmaster.
Carlos, it was one of those things. I wanted to meet him because I had heard so much, and I had taken an interest in nutrition. After meeting Rorion, coming from the fast food industry, and then becoming Horion's roommate and changing my diet completely, I'd really taken an interest in nutrition and really started to take care of myself. So when I got the opportunity to go to Brazil, I thought, like, wow, this is going to be amazing that I'll get a chance to meet and talk to Carlos Gracie. But it was kind of anticlimactic, just because it was one of those things where, yeah, I got a chance to meet him, but because he was older at the time, I think he was already, probably in his, it just seemed like a lot older. And because he didn't speak the language, and he really wasn't that open like Helio Gracie. Helio Gracie was amazing to be around. And because I was helping, and supporting Rorion in jiu-jitsu and helping him out financially and just, being roommates, that Rorion must have spoken, enough about me where Elio really liked me, and Carlos Gracie was just his brother, and I don't know how close they were at that stage. And he seemed to kind of, he was kind of pulling away and really got into nutrition, and he didn't really it was just kind of to meet him, but it was kind of we didn't really connect. And I don't think there was a whole lot of time. It was just basically I wanted to go over and meet him, but it's not like I'd gotten some tidbits of nutritional stuff or anything else.
Right. So
it was just one. It was one of those things that was kind of a bucket list. Meet Carlos Gracie. Whatever happens. If it turns out really good and there's a great meeting, great. If not, I met him.
So at least that one was accomplished.
That's right.
But speaking of Elio, though, do you have any jiu-jitsu related stories that stand out that from your time spent with him that you haven't spoken about publicly, and also any non-jiu-jitsu related memories that stand out that you haven't spoken about?
I don't know. It's been so long. There's nothing really that I don't think that I haven't spoken about. It's just that Helio Gracie was one of those guys, and like I have made, and I think I allude to this in my book, where you really felt like you were his favorite.
Yes.
I mean, he had a way of making you feel that it was all about helping you be the best that you can be. And being a recipient and being around in his energy, I mean, I got such there was such a caring, like him really honestly wanting to help me in my jiu-jitsu path. I mean, because of the relationship that I had with Rorion, I mean, it was special. But yet I've heard a lot of people say the same thing about him. Anyone who got a chance to know him a little bit, he really, he really honestly cared. So, being
And
able to be in the presence of him. And even when I went to Brazil, I mean, I go to Brazil, I figured I'd get picked up by somebody. I don't know who was going to pick me up. But Rorion Gracie comes with Helson. I mean, I kind of felt like royalty getting picked up by the Grand Master. I mean, of all the people there, I mean, it's just like he picks me up at the airport. I mean, that was quite special.
and not only the great Rorion Gracie, but our friend Roger and our friend Helson. I hadn't planned on even bringing up Helson, but we trained with Helson, been on the mat with him, got to pick his brain, and what an interesting guy, what a character. We love Helson.
Character describes Helson.
A character. What an amazing. When the last time Roger and I were on the mat with Helson, he had. And I'm not sure if we should even be bringing this up, Roger, but he had told us at that time he had just been in a street fight, and we're talking about Helson's almost 70 at this time, and he was scratched up, and he was showing us how he was scratched up. But Helson, he was also showing us how he was in great shape and saying, look at my stomach, it's in perfect shape. What a character! What a character! Helson is a great guy. But did you have a chance to train with Helson?
Yeah, I had. I don't think it was in Brazil, but when he was here, I had a limited amount of training with him. Helson was, he's kind of overlooked by the family. I mean, he's probably one of the toughest guys in the family. I mean, as far as the fight, everyone talks about Hickson this and that, but Helson was really one of those guys that was, he had a lot, he got into a lot of scrapes. So, technically he understands jiu-jitsu and quite amazing.
Absolutely.
And he's a character.
He is indeed. He is indeed. My co-host here, Roger, had the chance to actually at that time. Helson was showing us some, going through the technique and showing us if this then that. Fantastic stuff. But he was showing us some specific side mount control stuff that he was working on. And Roger is at the time, a purple belt, a very good purple belt. And Helson wanted to demonstrate that, it wouldn't matter, that he could still hold Roger down. So, almost 70 at the time, was holding Roger down as he tried every technique in the book to escape. And was Roger, you were left with some bruises after that encounter, were you not?
Yeah, and I was exhausted.
So we've experienced firsthand Helsing's amazingness, and I totally agree with that. Now, I did have one question. This is totally unrelated to the whole thing, but I just came to mind. At back in the old days, were you taught to block punches in the guard the same kind of in that same kind of 5-stage system or something similar to the punch block series, or did Rorion teach you the principles of distance management but in a different format?
Well, one of the things, remember when I was doing jiu-jitsu too, the classes would always start with stand-up techniques. So it was to clinch, and then he would, and in our training too, we would always, and this is early on in the garage, he would go into like how to defend when someone's throwing punches. So whether it be like the punch block series, a lot of the principles were the same. It's just that they put a name to it. I mean, I was asked by Henner if I wanted to go through the instructor, because I went through the first instructor program
Right.
back in 1993. And, he asked me, he says, hey, do you want to go through it again? And I basically turned him down just because a lot of it is the same thing, but it's like learning a new language. I mean, the techniques are the same, but they call them something else. So, and I thought, like, I don't really need to go through again, and because it's it was kind of an intense thing to do, to go through, the teaching thing, and then go through that, and then spend to get certified, whatever the certification, which is, I think you're there 3 days after you've gone through, that's when you can start to test and go through the thing. I didn't, I wasn't going to teach at the academy. I was too far away to teach there. So it really, look, it'd be interesting to go through it, but there was really little of benefit for me to go through, because the techniques, like I said, were basically all the same. It's just that they changed, they call it something else.
Well, that's a interesting segue into a question that I like to ask pretty much everybody that knows or that has an opinion. A lot of people say that Royce's Jiu-Jitsu in 1993 was basic at the time of the first UFC and has evolved greatly since then. That the guys of today have far, far more advanced Jiu-Jitsu compared to Royce's. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. I mean, Jiu-Jitsu has morphed into something totally different. I mean, I was just talking to a friend of mine. Do you know who Chris Saunders is?
I do. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, Chris is Hickson's first black belt, and I've known Chris since, training in the garage, and I think 84 is when he started. And, and Chris teaches at Beverly Hills, at the Gracie Academy in Beverly Hills. And, and we were talking because Chris is about 10 years younger than me. And I'm going to be 72 in a couple weeks. And Chris, I think, just turned 60. But, there are so many new techniques. And he was just saying, like, well, when I go into and want to learn, or, go over like some foot lock stuff or whatever, or leg locks, and you start to see how advanced that it's become. And Chris says, well, for me, and when you're teaching a class, people want to there's a certain amount that want to know the latest, greatest stuff. And he says, so what do I do? Do I go and start training these things so I can understand it, or do I just do what I do and let it go? And I just said, look, how much energy do you want to put into learning a new technique? Because there's going to be a new technique and a new technique and a new technique. It'll never stop. And you only have a limited amount of energy to put in. So do what we do best and just show them the principles. And so to answer your question, yeah, it's changed a lot because, and that's all Hoist needed back then. It was, like Rorion has said, he said a lot of people could have done what Hoist did. I mean, there were a lot of students at the academy that probably could have done what Hoist did, but Hoist was the chosen representative, and he did what he did. So
very, very interesting, Professor. Would you say that is an evolution or more of a mutation?
I don't know. I mean, it's. I think it's things like that are always going to evolve. I mean, when you look and see how much things have evolved in jiu-jitsu, I mean, it's amazing. It's truly amazing to see how things have changed over the years. I mean, it's just. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna to ask kind of a follow-up question. Do you think that the technique has changed to the degree that someone like Hicks at his prime in it's speculation, but any kind of a competition with the best of today, that Hickson would still be able to run through them like he did everybody else, or
I don't know. Whether he could run through them is, it depends on. I mean, there's a lot of factors. I mean, I can only speculate, but I have no idea. I mean, there's a lot of people who talk smack about Hickson, but they never shared the mat with Hickson.
Right.
And Hickson would, the guy in jiu-jitsu was quite special. So, whether or not he would run through them, is something we'll only have in conversation and speculate going, I wonder. Some people will say no way, and some people will say yes. Some people will say, oh man, like he couldn't deal with someone like Gordon Ryan. Who knows?
Sure. So, my final question from me, Roger, and then I'm going to just throw it over to you for just a minute here. Right at the beginning there, I said that you considered yourself something that you talked about in the book, the official, for Rorion Gracie, the official shit starter, because you're responsible for setting up a lot of those infamous challenge matches. Do you think that the culture of proving effectiveness should remain in the past, or do you think that there's something that we're missing today with these type of without these type of scenarios?
No, I think it should stay in the past, because Rorion was proving a point that most fights will go to the ground. And you have to know what to do when you get to the ground. I mean, that became clearly evident when the UFC started. And that's why everybody has learned. But look what it's turned into. Now it's turned into about controlling. You know, it's become wrestling.
Right.
And, you know, a lot of striking. And, you know, and then there's always this thing about street versus sport. And like, I forgot who it was. There was a guy that, I won't mention any names, but there's a guy who put a post out. You know, I put out my information and I said, you know, and part of my book says Gracie Jiu-Jitsu saved my life. And there's a guy out there that's saying Gracie Jiu-Jitsu ruined my life.
Right.
And the reason why he says that is strictly what's happening to jiu-jitsu right now. Is jiu-jitsu is becoming what I call high school wrestling.
Yep.
It's not about the technique that you're learning. It's about the strength and the physicality and how much people are training, and people are getting younger and younger and younger when they get into it. But if you want to sustain it, if jiu-jitsu is wrecking your back and your knees, it means you're training too hard, and you're in a competition-based school, and maybe you're going with the wrong people. In other words, I look at jiu-jitsu as something that'll help you with self-defense if you ever need it. It raises your odds. Doesn't make you a Superman. It raises your odds. There's a lot of camaraderie. If you get your ego out of it and you're not doing it for competition, then it's a lot of fun. And you also have to learn how to maintain your body, because it is like anything. It's an exercise. So, you know, there's different factors in jiu-jitsu, but
And
you know,
this,
it's, go ahead.
sorry, Professor, this is something that we totally, totally agree. I see that it's kind of a form of anti-jiu-jitsu that people are training to kind of prevent I guess, well, I don't want to say prevent effectiveness, because that's what great, in part what we're trying to accomplish, but they're just trying to prevent the technique from moving along, just to lock down the situation and make it about the rules entirely. But that's just the way that I look at it. Be totally wrong. Now, Roger, did you have any questions for the professor that you wanted to put out?
Yes, I was just curious. Whenever you had to make a choice, um, with training with Hickson or training with Orion, um, you mentioned that you had invested in the gym. I was just wondering if that was the biggest reason behind that choice, or if what other factors.
um, well, yeah, I mean, it was a huge factor, because, you know, back then things had changed because of, you know, like everybody back then. I mean, you know, you now, like the attitude in jiu-jitsu now, I don't think it's, especially in a regular jiu-jitsu school, if it's not a competition-based school, it's like you can come and go as you please, and it's a business. So if you want to go ahead and train over at Joe's Jiu-Jitsu Academy, you go over and do that. And it's not bad if you want to, you know, go back over to your home school, and, you know, just so you can be well-rounded and learn what other people are doing. But back then it was like, you know, and I don't know, because Hickson and Rorion had a falling out, you know, who knows. Back then, it's kind of like he kind of made it a choice, like, hey, you got to go with him or you got to go with me, period. Make your decision. And and I understand why he was saying that. It hurt. There was a big part of me that wanted to go with Rickson, but I had $60,000 wrapped up into the jiu-jitsu school in Torrance.
Right.
And I wasn't about to walk away because it wasn't, it was part my money and part my parents' money. And I just, I couldn't walk away from it. I mean, I didn't know if I would get it back at the time. And I knew that I'd probably been much more effective as a practitioner if I would have gone with Rickson, if my body could have held up. I mean, it was, back then, I mean, I was already, close to 10 years older than Rickson. And, and I was one of those guys that needed rest in between. I'm not one of those guys that's just going to be on the mat day in and day out. Never have been.
How often did you train?
My body, a couple times a week.
Okay.
Just because I needed rest in between. I'd go over there and I'd help with classes. When Rorion would have a private class. When after I moved out, I had lived there, so I'd go over there and I'd train a little bit here and help him out and spar a little bit here and there. But never really like guys are training like 3 or 4 hours a day, because it just didn't happen back then, because the climate was private classes.
Yeah.
So I got much more technical, and where a lot of guys, I see how the physicality has played a huge part in their learning technique, but they're also strong and they're also spending a lot of time on the mat. And, after a certain age, you have to walk away from that if you want to preserve your body.
Sure.
Roger,
before.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, what would your current schedule looks like as far as like teaching and training?
I teach Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday night at 2 different schools, and I teach a class on Saturday, and then whenever I teach a couple private classes here and there, and not doing too much personal training myself. I mean, recently, a couple months ago, I developed a hernia, so I have to be pretty careful, because I don't want to exacerbate that, and I have to get surgery after the first of the year to repair this thing, and then I'll get back on the mat. But the older I get, I'm on the mat a lot, doing my own personal stuff. I my focus is really on teaching and sharing what I know, sharing the way that it was taught to me.
And that's exactly what we're interested in as well, more than anything, more than competition, more than more than anything. We want to continue the proliferation and the spreading of the art. Now, Roger, before you finish up here, I did have one question just to follow up on the what you said previously about the division that happened. The story is that Royce was chosen because he was would be a better example for jiu-jitsu because he was more frail and whatnot. Is you were there, so is that's not correct?
Hang on a second. I have a cat that's trying to jump in my lap when I'm talking. I'll say this. Rickson had left the academy. At one time, it was Rickson, Hoyler, and Royce teaching classes in the academy. And Rorion was, we had bills to pay, and it was hard to support for that academy to support those guys. And Rorion basically was kind of like, he was the guy in charge because the lease was in his name. It was, the school was in his name. And, you know, so it was hard for those guys. They were scraping by because they all had families. I mean, Hickson had 4 kids. Hoyler had, you know, at least, I think he had like 3 kids. And, you know, to support a family in the jiu-jitsu that they were at the academy who were, and before the UFC, it was hard to, you know, to make that place work. I mean, the sheriffs were coming by a couple times wanting to close the doors because we couldn't pay the rent. So Hickson had to make a choice. When he left, so when the UFC started, it wouldn't have been the best choice for them to put Hickson in because Hickson wasn't at the school. So all the attention would have gone to Hickson Gracie at that little school that he was in West LA. So instead of saying, this is what, you know, really happened, I'll leave you to make your own decision, because it's truly a business decision. If, I mean, all the attention, I mean, we went from barely getting by to a huge waiting list after the UFC. I mean, all of a sudden, you know, our group classes were like 6 and 8 guys, and this is when Voice was teaching, you know, and I was teaching a little bit, and Lowell was teaching, you know, and then all of a sudden, you know, after the UFC, 6 to 8 guys. Rorion, the academy back then had a office space above it, and it was vacant, and Rorion rented that whole thing, which, and our big, you know, they put up an octagon upstairs and a huge room. So our classes went from 6 to 8 in a group class to 25 to 30. So, you know, and that's all because of what Hoist did. Now, if Hickson would have won, it wouldn't have helped the business in Torrance. Maybe, you know, just like everybody else, they would have heard about it and they would have come to the academy. But do you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So whether or not, I know this is how the story goes, but the story goes, you know, because it sounded better. And I can only say, in my opinion, I'm not going to say anyone for a fact that I know for sure, but you draw your own conclusion.
Understood. Roger, do you have anything else for the professor?
You know, I'm just curious. Do you regret not rolling with Judo Gene LaBelle?
Do I regret it?
Yeah.
Fuck no. Gene LaBelle, first of all, because, you know, and here's the thing. I don't have anything personal. I don't really know Gene LaBelle. It was my limited interaction. But the people who know, and there's probably not a lot of people who really know Gene LaBelle, but have a lot of respect for Gene LaBelle because of, you know, what he's done, what he's accomplished, and who he was. And, you know, not only was he a great judo player, but he, you know, was a stunt man, and, you know, and he produced some tough guys. But the reason Gene LaBelle came up to me and asked me to roll is because of, I don't know what his students said to him, but the person that I went up against, you know, remember, I was a blue belt, and I kept tapping this person out, and then they put a black belt up against me who couldn't tap me out. So, you know, and I think that he came up to me because of, I'm sure someone said something to him like, hey, there's a little, the whatever that they said, no one will really know what they said. But when Gene the Bell walked up to me and asked me if I wanted to roll, that's when I pointed to, and I don't know which one of the Gracies was near me, but, Helson was there, Hickson was there, Hoyce was, I said, those guys would be happy to roll with you. And so he walked in a different direction. And so, I lost a little bit of respect for the guy because I honestly felt that he wanted to teach me a lesson.
Yeah, right.
And I didn't want to be the recipient of, look, Gene the Bell was probably at that time easily, he was a thick guy. He wasn't, maybe 5'8" or something, but probably, well over 200 pounds. And I'm like 140, 150 pounds. And really green. I mean, I was a blue belt. So, I don't regret it one bit. I really, I mean, I was kind of surprised that he wouldn't even share the mat with those other guys.
Roger, if I could jump in just one last time here, because I would be remiss if I didn't.
Come on, it's not one last time. You're going to have another question. Go ahead.
If the roles had been reversed, and rather than Judo Gene the Bell, if it had been Elio Gracie, how do you think that situation would have gone? He certainly wouldn't have turned around and walked away. You agree with that?
Wait a second. You mean if Elio Gracie would have been there?
Well, yeah. How do you think that would have went if he had been there, first of all?
Well, I don't know what difference that would have made, because Elio Gracie was, small and older at the time. But I mean, I don't really understand your question, really.
It was if Elio had been, basically challenged, as you had said, if you want to roll, you can roll with these guys. If Elio had been in that same situation, he would have rolled with those guys. But it sounds like Judo Gene the Bell didn't want that kind of challenge.
Well, for possibly, ego reasons. He didn't want to possibly look bad, because he told Rorion told me this. He said, because, they had met on the set of different movies. Rorion did a lot of stunt work and extra work in the movies. And he met Gene LaBelle a couple times, and Rorion developed a reputation. I mean, remember he choreographed the fight scene Lethal Weapon with Gary Busey and Mel Gibson, and Lethal Weapon, the first one. And people were you started to hear the name. So when someone introduced them, he told Rorion, he says, hey, come on out and Rorion goes, yeah, I'd be happy to go over there and train, and and at least come over. He says, oh no, if you come over, you're going to train. And Rorion says, okay, fine. I went over and I watched Rorion also go to the West LA Judo School and just go through a bunch of guys. It was no challenge at all. So, for Gene to basically turn down, and then the people were saying, well, but Gene was older at the time. Yes, he was older at the time. Then why did he ask me to roll and not anyone else who was my age? Helson was my age, but Helson was a frickin' black belt and a beast. But he wouldn't roll with them. And it's not like they were going to do a competition. We're talking about just, rolling. So I don't have any regrets at all. I like my body, and I kind of felt that someone was going to try to teach me a lesson that I didn't deserve to be taught.
Yeah. 100% agreed. Roger, anything left for the professor?
Just yeah, I was just curious, like your opinion on other martial arts. Like a lot of people cross train. We have a lot of jiu-jitsu guys like training wrestling. Just if what your thoughts on that, and if it would be beneficial, maybe even just for self-defense. Should folks wrestle or do Muay Thai, or can Gracie
Well, put it
Jiu-Jitsu
this
get?
way. It depends on their age. If they're young, if you want to cross train, I have guys that do stand up, but they're younger guys. But when you start getting up into your late 30s, 40s, if you want to do a little Muay Thai just to understand, but to wrestle, wrestling is brutal. I mean, that's why. At what age do you see most guys wrestle? High school, college.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Right.
So, and why do they leave it? Because it's so freaking brutal. It's hard on your body. So, yes, I see schools go, oh yeah, we have a wrestling class, and it's like, okay, fine, do it, but I never learned anything else. And look, being in my 70s right now, I go for a walk. I live in Santa Monica. Things got pretty crazy out here, and there's still, the laws have changed. There's a little more crime now. So when I walk, I carry pepper gel. I carry, a good quality pepper spray, and I walk with, and I also have a knife. A little pocket knife.
Yeah.
And I carry a water bottle with me made out of glass. So the last thing I want to do is go to the ground. I'm in my 70s. Me going to the ground, I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to hurt anyone else. So my first line of defense is, man, I'm pulling the pepper spray out. You better keep your distance unless and if you get by that, then okay. Then you're a badass. And then hopefully I'll be able to defend myself. But, so to answer your question as far as, cross-training, yeah, depending on their age, depending on what their goals are. It's not bad to learn how to do some basic striking. So I don't know if that answers the question, or if that's the question you wanted, or the answer that you were looking for.
No, I was just generally curious.
What do you think?
I find it fun. I've done a year of Muay Thai, and it was interesting. But I think I
How
would
old are
stick
you?
to I'm 37.
Okay, and there's my point.
Yeah. It's a young man's
Right.
game, especially wrestling.
Absolutely. So.
So anything else, Roger? Our normal is jiu-jitsu, all that you need to survive an attack if you have no way out.
Put it this way, let's qualify jiu-jitsu though, because remember, most jiu-jitsus are taught in a sportive school. So, and then I was talking to one of my buddies who's a black belt up in Washington. And he said, Richard, Gordon Ryan, he trains sport, and if he got into a fight in the street, he'd probably destroy the guy. I go, yes. And he says, well, Gary Tonin too. I said, yeah, these guys are the elite of the elite. They are not the rule. They're the exception. Jeff Glover too. Jeff Glover's trained a lot. His body's wrecked, but he said, look, he would kick ass in the street. But these are guys that are training all the time. But we're talking about the students,
Yes.
the masses. We're not talking about the cream of the crop. We're talking about the students learning that are going there, that aren't training, 20 hours a week in this. We're just talking guys that are just, learning, spending a few hours on the mat a week and being able to defend themselves, and also going through self-defense scenarios, not just training a sport. So there's a difference between the jiu-jitsu that people are learning nowadays, completely sport, versus the stuff that I learned. Because, there was awareness, there was, grabs, there was takedowns specific for when someone grabs you, and how to deal with the opponent who's going to, want to punch you when you're on the ground. Most people, they don't know how to deal. And even basic headlocks, most people don't know how to deal with that.
Right.
Without athleticism. I've taught seminars where I've shown headlocks, and a younger guy will, he'll show me what he does to get out of a headlock, and I realize the power that he uses. And I said, that's great. I says, what if I'm like 60, 70 pounds heavier? And I says, you can't do what you just did to me if you're 60 pounds heavier. And I says, where using the techniques that I know, I can do this to a guy. So I said, and that's the difference. Learning the technique, not relying on your physicality.
Yes.
And that's the way that jiu-jitsu, from the source, from the I don't want to say the source, because that's not what I really mean, but it's the kind of jiu-jitsu that I learned, where it focuses on self-defense.
Well, I thought it was odd that a lot of sport schools, I would be at a tournament and nobody knew the trap and roll.
Yeah.
They would get stuck on the bottom. I was like, oh, I thought everybody learned the trap and roll right off the bat, first thing.
You would think.
And this is something that I do whenever I roll sport rolls with people too, is kind of do reach for their face. And I'll at some point, Professor, if you don't mind, send you some stuff that we have that we can show you. But as far as training and teaching and whatnot, but I like to kind of just reach for their face, to hold them in headlocks, to do things that they never see in sport competition, and just see how they respond. And it's eye-opening. It's insane. But I'm sure that you've experienced a whole lot more than me. You've been teaching and way longer. But I've seen it, and it's amazing. But Roger, Sorry, Professor, did you have anything?
By the way, also, I wanted to let you guys know that I am a co-host on a podcast too.
Oh, what's the podcast?
The podcast name of it is called the Matt Martial Arts Podcast. We had the season 1. I was on the podcast. I was a guest on the podcast, and then the guy's a purple belt over at Gracie University, and we got along really well, and he asked me if I wanted to be a co-host. We don't record regularly, and the theme of the podcast is basically what we're talking about right now. Awesome. It's just to, look, a lot of people go, oh, Richard's an older guy, his mind is made up. And it's not. If a person wants to train and do a lot of physical stuff, great. But eventually, you're going to have to learn. If you stay in jiu-jitsu long enough, you're not going to have the strength and the speed. So you better learn how to develop your technique.
Very true.
So, and that's what we basically talk about. And, and I've had a few guys on. There's a guy in Arizona that was a big competitor and very accomplished. And now he says, Richard, that stuff means nothing to me. He says, because I want to teach self-defense. I want to teach people how to avoid the fight, and, not to test ourselves, and look at it for look at jiu-jitsu for fun instead of, a competition, which I'm not against. I have to qualify that. I'm not against competition. I just think that be well-rounded, learn how to defend yourself. If not for you, if you're the person you're going to teach, your girlfriend, your wife, your kid, learning some basic fundamentals.
And we agree a lot. 100% agree with that. When Roger competed in sport jiu-jitsu competitions, the way that we looked at it was that Roger was competing as a Gracie Jiu-Jitsu representative in those competitions, regardless of the rules and whatnot. We still wanted to be able to use the techniques that were applicable, and in the event that I'm thinking of referencing, Roger, you won gold in that one with those techniques.
In my third tournament.
The third, yeah, you won gold. So, but that's the way that we look at it. No big deals, just for fun, and we know the difference. We play sport and we live street. I guess if that's a cliche, but it's the truth, and that's something that we hammer, into new students, and it was hammered into me and hammered into Roger. Self-defense, the whole program, exactly like it is, like you explained it in your book, and how I know those to be.
So how many people are there at the school that you I don't know, do you teach or just train there?
No, currently Roger is in San Antonio. We were spread apart for work reasons, so right now I'm on basically a furlough. Is that what it's called, a furlough? I am in a place in Texas that doesn't have a lot of jiu-jitsu opportunity, and that's why we're doing this podcast. We're trying to use jiu-jitsu in other ways to do, to solve the similar types of problems, or at least to draw as many people to the prize that we can. But as of right now,
just families, right? Just our kids and our wives and friends.
Kids, wives, and friends. Yeah, but we teach them, the wives, the rape safe program. The kids, we teach them how to deal with bullies, and when it comes down to it, we practice the self-defense techniques pretty much on a just non-stop loop that never ends. And then sometimes we play around with the sport techniques, but never forgetting that foundation has to be razor sharp, and that's what we are most concerned with, with having a super good understanding of, and being able to deliver the right way so that another person can understand it and comprehend it as easy as you did, but we should also collaborate at some point. Our podcast, if it's possible, we should do it. If not, no big deal, but that would be awesome. We have similar types of subject matter, but
right. So I'm curious, how many people? So in other words, one of the reasons that I came on here too is to also talk about, because I was the first, and also it was, the mentality was different when I was doing it, because we were out there to prove, back when I started, it was all about punching, kicking, that's what martial arts was back then. Sure. So it was I kind of call it the Old West mentality, because, all of a sudden these guys come along and have this crazy stuff called jiu-jitsu, and it's going to the ground, and there were these non-believers, and there's even, guys like, Bill Wallace who, you know, is a well-accomplished kickboxer. But, you know, even some of the stuff that he did after the UFC, this was saying it was an advertisement and it really wouldn't happen in like reality.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, look, it happened the way it happened because of the effectiveness of jiu-jitsu. And there were a lot of naysayers, but like I said, now no one has to do this. And one of the main reasons I came on is also because I want people to know about when jiu-jitsu started in this country. I mean, people are doing jiu-jitsu. They don't know why they're doing it, how they're doing it. There's just a school on every corner. And my book basically tells how the frickin' thing got started here. And, you know, it's not only does it talk about how much my life changed because of it, but it talks about how this crazy thing called jiu-jitsu kind of revolutionized the martial arts.
It's the reason that we're talking right now. These, you know, us three gentlemen, and all in different age ranges, different parts of the country. We would never know anything about each other, probably otherwise, but because of Elio Gracie and then, you know, what the generations to come and what you guys did, you playing a huge part, you know, a huge role in the deal, that you don't get credit for, Professor, that you should. It's where it's at today, as far as popularity, because in the end, I care more about people getting to the door. You know, as long as they get to a jiu-jitsu school, the more they get there, the more that we'll find an actual legit, well, I don't want to say any, or some are not legit, but I'm not going to specifically say these are not legit, but the more it's advertised and spoken about and whatnot, the more people will come to our doors, and you know, by proxy, the more we'll get the prize. So
Right.
yeah.
And I'm not looking for, you know, accolades. I was basically, I helped out. I was an ambassador for jiu-jitsu. I loved jiu-jitsu when I first did. I still love it. You know, it's just something that you know, I've done jiu-jitsu more than half of my life. And it's just something that, you know, it was them, and I was just glad that I was a small part to help, you know, help this thing roll out and do what it needed to do, and it's huge. By the way, there's going to be a documentary probably released, probably not till 2025. It's the UFC documentary. I think it'll be on, who does it? That's right. It's, yeah, ESPN. I shot my part in a documentary earlier this year, and there's a lot of people that talk about this. So this is going to be out, you know, they'll probably release it sometime in 25, you know, for, you know, talking about how the whole thing started. So something to look forward to. I remember when I shot it, I'm going like, oh God, when's this going to be out? And he goes, 25. 25? I hope I'm alive.
Well, I hope you are too, Professor.
Yeah.
And right. You don't want the accolades. You deserve them. That you are, you know, you played your part. And without every piece to the puzzle, it's an incomplete puzzle. And you know what we have today, I think all of those figures played their role, whether they were a rook, a knight, a pawn, whatever, that everyone was necessary, and we're here today in part because you were one of those pieces. So thank you so much for that, and for being
Thank you.
on the podcast. Roger, any final thoughts?
Just thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Professor.
My pleasure. It's Richard too, by the way.
You got it, Richard.
All right. Thanks for, and so you guys you'll one more time before you will exit out, you'll tell people about my book called Worth Defending, available on Amazon. It's audio, Kindle, and written. And paper. So, there's no excuse not to know it. And I'm really glad because we just had a black belt. Hidden and Hennard had something called the Black Belt Exchange. There was 150 guys that came from all over the country, to be part of this thing for 4 hours, just kind of share techniques. And it's nice now. The book's been out. Next month it'll be 3 years. And at first, I was out there marketing the book, and now when I meet different people, they go like, "Oh, I picked up your book. Haven't read it yet, but I picked it up. I heard a lot of good things about it." So it's catching on. The popularity is there, and hopefully this will help. And I appreciate you guys. Thank you. I appreciate you guys letting me come on and talk.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the book is Worth Defending: How Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Saved My Life, by Richard Bresler, the gentleman that we've been talking to here, and a lot of his recollections, and he goes into detail in the book. It's just a fantastic read, especially if you're a jiu-jitsu student already, sport or self-defense, either one. You're going to get something out of it, some awesome stories. And even if you're not a jiu-jitsu student, the elements in the book are they're more human. It's the human nature. These are things that everyone has some experience with. They might not have experienced fighting and struggling and suffering like you or I, but they do fight, struggle, and suffer in their own way. And this book, Worth Defending: How Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Saved My Life, that's going to help you. And no matter what you do in your life, you're going to get something out of this book. And again, the Professor Richard Bresler is the author. Richard, any final thoughts from you? Anything?
Also too I'm on Facebook and Instagram. Anybody has any questions or wants to reach out with anything, feel free to contact me through either Facebook or Instagram.
And what's the name of your podcast again?
It's called the Mat Martial Arts Podcast. It's very small. I'm not a professional podcaster. I'm more of a guest. So, I'm not a professional interviewer, and we're just kind of, we're out there basically spreading a specific message.
Can't wait to check it out. How many episodes do you guys have?
Well, with me as a co-host, I think maybe 6 or 7.
Oh,
we haven't recorded. We didn't record for a little bit. One, my mom passed in June of this year, so I went up and I was away, so we didn't record. And, just getting, my mom we were very close. And so, just kind of moving back here from Washington and coming back and kind of getting back into the mainstream. It's been a lot emotionally and physically to deal with that. So
right.
I'm starting to get back on track. What was that?
I just wanted to say sorry for your loss.
Thank you. All right, guys.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
We really do,
Sure.
Professor. We
By the way, what's the name of the jiu-jitsu podcast? content I'm on?
This is the Jiu-Jitsu Robot podcast, and
Okay.
we named it that. There's a whole thing behind it, but it's, I guess, specifically kind of referring to me as the Jiu-Jitsu robot, because I'm kind of just all or nothing type of person. That I do believe that Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is all you need to win a fight, but that there are caveats, and that we would need to dig into that. Um, but I'm sure that at the end of that conversation we would get to a point that we agree. But it is the Jiu-Jitsu Robot podcast. You can find it on YouTube, probably the easiest. And I'll send you a link, and I'll send you some of the other videos we've done, how to roll with white belts as an advanced student, different things, trying to just help people navigate the difficulty if they're in that world of sports jiu-jitsu and people are crushing them and whatnot, and they have no choice. And we're trying to help them navigate that experience.
Right.
But that's it. I believe that's all we've got for you, Richard. We appreciate you coming on the podcast so much, and hopefully we'll be able to do something together between our two podcasts soon.
Sound good.
Thanks. Have a good night.
You too.
Okay.
I think it went great.
Yeah, it went great. And I think that the question that my big question, my big thing, the evolution of jiu-jitsu, I think we believe the same things, but we once Richard, I would now, Richard, I would be calling you Professor, from here until eternity. Otherwise, if you hadn't said to call you Richard, but you said call you Richard, so I'm going to call you Richard. So I believe we may agree that jiu-jitsu has changed, but I am coming from the perspective that it hasn't changed for the better, and I believe that Richard would agree with that, and that's why I asked if he thought that jiu-jitsu had evolved or had it mutated. And what I meant by that is evolved into a more effective art, or mutated into an entirely different one. You see what I mean?
Well, I just can't help think that he brought up a great point that maybe these elite athletes are going to be better fighters, and they're going to have the wrestling. They're going to have, uh, you know, uh, the Danaher guys and the B team guys. They roll every day, and they're going to be, I guess, unbeatable to a hobbyist. But if you avoid like maybe 100 guys in the world, like your jiu-jitsu is gonna work great against anybody but these like top, 100, 200 guys.
Right, exactly. And yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, it's the way, I guess, the way that I framed the question left a little bit of room to to say yes, because clearly we both agree that the footlock setups and some of the techniques that the guys use in the tournaments are different, and the setups are probably new and different, but the act of attacking a foot, or attacking an arm, attacking a neck, the human body only has what it has. It doesn't have 14 arms so that you can learn the 8-arm arm lock, and that you learn that 20 years from now. No, we have 2 arms, 2 legs for the most part, and a neck. And every technique that is done has to be done to one of those areas. And Elio Gracie had a defensive strategy for all of those positions and a response pattern to all of those attacks. He might not have known whatever kind of new guard the guys are doing, the worm guard, or I've heard that name, but he might not have known all this stuff, or the some of the 10th planet applications of techniques, but he knew what it was like for people to attack his legs and his feet, and he had defenses for those, and he had effective defenses to those. Otherwise, he wouldn't be known as the squirrel. I mean, have you heard that before? Elio was the squirrel.
I have not. That's a new one.
Yeah, like he's the squirrel. Because have you ever tried to run up and grab a squirrel?
Impossible.
Impossible. You can't catch him. You get it? So he was the squirrel. That's his animal name, which really draws attention to Helson's, the freaking shark.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
and Hickson, the bear. Hoist was jacare. What is that thing? That's a
Alligator.
alligator. That's right. Yep. Who else do we got? Holben. I'm not as familiar with Holben. I'm not sure about him. We've got the buzzard. I wish I would have asked Richard if he knew or has heard of someone named Nick Cooley. I will send him a message and ask him, but I guess at this point, Professor Richard, you're listening to this, and you know whether or not you that name is familiar, and if it isn't, then you're missing out, sir. Because
Well, it is now.
Yeah, no, it is now. But anyway, what phenomenal conversation. Generous, very generous of the professor, of Richard, to give us way more of his time than he needed to. That all the best, right? All the best jiu-jitsu guys are the most giving, and when it comes right down to it, they really care about spreading the truth about talking about jiu-jitsu, about I guess in a way teaching the younger generation, which is what we are, what happened, and we've experienced that they're some of the best guys out there. So another one here tonight, and yeah, this is the Jiu-Jitsu Robot Podcast, and you have been listening to the legendary Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Black Belt and the author of Worth Defending, How Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Saved My Life. Make sure that you look up exactly what I just said there, because there's a title online that if you get any of that wrong, it's going to send you to the wrong book. You'll find out quickly that you got the wrong one, but Worth Defending, How Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Saved My Life by Richard Bresler. And that gentleman was our guest on tonight's podcast, and we really hope that you enjoyed the show. Everybody have a good night.